person that enjoyed personhood in good standing. That's what the 13th Amendment ended slavery, and the 14th Amendment guaranteed equal rights. And now this court has twisted it into a command that there's not a difference between a man and a woman when it comes to joining them together in matrimony. Well, there is a difference, and it's been husband and wife in every one of these states until such time as the activists got busy. Those are the kind of things that if the states want to establish same-sex marriage, so be it. That's the voice of the people. It's constitutional, and it fits the structure of our United States Constitution along with the various state constitutions and the structure of the rule of law. But if a court wants to manufacture a new right, let alone a new command, that's wrong, and this Congress ought to speak up, and we need a president that will appoint justices to the Supreme Court that will rule on the text of the Constitution, its original meaning, and on the understanding of what the text of that Constitution says. So I would back up to the King versus Burwell decision, Mr. Speaker, and add this for the benefit of those folks that are listening in, and maybe there is some staff of the Supreme Court that are listening. If you discover a law, if it's a law like Obamacare that comes before the Supreme Court, and you read the text of that, and it doesn't include or federal government, and you believe that Congress wanted the federal government to be able to establish the exchanges or intended to write that into the law, you don't get to just write it in and say that's what they really meant. You have to remand it back to Congress and tell us this is what the law says. So therefore, if Congress wants the law to say something different, we have to amend it here in the House and the Senate and get a presidential signature on it. That is the constitutional structure of this government that we have, Mr. Speaker. And it's a bit frustrating for me to listen to the dialogue otherwise that the Senate's not doing their job because they withhold a confirmation of a presidential appointment when you have a president that has proven that he's not going to put up an appointment that will protect our Constitution. This is the time we must defend our Constitution, and we must nominate and elect a president of the United States who will make those appointments to the Supreme Court, who believe the Constitution means what it says. But, Mr. Speaker, I didn't actually come here to talk about that. That's my rebuttal to what I've listened to for the last 40 minutes or so. I came here to talk about the rule of law, for sure. And part of this is stimulated by an immigration hearing that we had yesterday in the subcommittee of House Judiciary. This is a type of hearing that I have listened to too many times. One of the hardest hearings that I have sat through in my time here in this Congress, Mr. Speaker. This was a hearing that had witnesses, a fine Sheriff Jenkins from Frederick County, Maryland, who has been enforcing immigration law, standing up for the rule of law. He's been prudently using the legal and justifiable evidence that he had before him, and he's been criticized for his effectiveness by the people that don't want to enforce the law. It's a good witness, Sheriff Jenkins. But additionally, we had witnesses from two families that were suffering tragically. One of them was a mother of Joshua Wilkerson. Her name is Laura Wilkerson. She's testified before the Judiciary Committee in the past at least once, and I have met her at an immigration event in Richmond, Virginia on another occasion and listened to the tragic, tragic story of her son Joshua, who was essentially abducted from his school as about a sophomore in high school or so, and hauled out into outside of town, where he was beaten mercilessly and bludgeoned and finally murdered, and then the perpetrator, an illegal alien whom the law enforcement had encountered and released onto the streets of America, who had no business being in America in the first place, and whom law enforcement already had picked up at least once. This illegal alien beat this boy to death. And then he went and bought gasoline and burned his body. He hauled his body out and poured gasoline on it and burned this Joshua Wilkerson's body. And then he went and took a shower and went to a movie as if it was just another day in the life of. Well, Mr. Speaker, it was another day in the life of America and Americans. It's another life lost to an illegal criminal alien who was unlawfully present in America, who had no business to be here, one who had been encountered by law enforcement officers in the past, one whom I believe ICE declined to pick up and place into removal proceedings. This happens every day in this country. It happens hundreds of times in this country each year. These incidents of illegal aliens that are arrested and turned loose on the street because the president has this idea of prioritization or prosecutorial discretion is costing lives in America. And it's costing in the end thousands of lives in America. And the sad, sad story told by Laura Wilkerson yesterday, that she has the courage and the heart to come here and share her story with us and to place that awful, brutal, ghastly memory again into her mind's eye and pour that forth into the congressional record so that some of us will soak that up and be mobilized to do something more to resist the president's policy of amnesty, de facto amnesty, amnesty by executive edict that has been part and parcel of the Obama policy since the beginning of his time here in office, and it's been getting worse and worse every month. I thank God for Laura Wilkerson, and I ask God to bless the life and the memory and the soul of Joshua Wilkerson, who has paid a tremendously high price because we have an ideological president who, I'd say to the other side of the aisle, who's not doing his job. In fact, he's ordering law enforcement officers not to do their job. Federal law requires that when immigration law enforcement officers encounter an individual as unlawfully present in the United States, quote, he shall be placed in removal proceedings, close quote. That's the law. And our Border Patrol officers included are told, if you're here to enforce the law and you're determined to do so, you'd better get yourself another job. They've become the welcome wagon on the southern border. And now, most anybody that crosses that border and makes it across the Rio Grande River or across the land border that stretches from Texas all the way across through New Mexico, Arizona, and California to the Pacific Ocean, most anybody that gets across there knows if you just claim asylum, you can be a refugee, and this federal government will roll out the welcome wagon. Former member of Congress Michelle Bachmann and I stood on the banks of the Rio Grande River at Roma, Texas here a summer and a half or so ago and watched as they inflated a raft on the other side of the river, two coyotes, fairly good-sized raft, and they helped a lady into that raft Sunday afternoon, broad daylight, exactly at the shift change for the Border Patrol. And they helped a pregnant lady into the raft. She had two little bags of her property, and they raft across the river, brought it up to the shoreline under the eyes of the city police and the Border Patrol, but it was shift change. And they helped, one of the coyotes got out of the raft while the other one stabilized it, helped the pregnant lady out of the raft onto U.S. shores, and then handed her two little ditty bags. And he got back into the raft, and the two coyotes went back across the river, deflated the raft, folded it up, put it in the trunk of their car, the car that we'd watched go around and around over there, knowing that it was a coyote car because they recognized it from the U.S. side of the river. And then lady stood there, she and her unborn baby and her two ditty bags, waiting for the Border Patrol to show up. Takes a little longer during the shift change. But they show up, no doubt. And I didn't follow this case any further, and they would have preferred that I didn't. But here's what I will predict happened, that she applied for asylum. The baby is now born, and the baby is an American citizen, and she is the parent of an anchor baby. Well, that's the kind of person that Barack Obama has granted a de facto, at least a temporary amnesty to, for the deferred action for parents of, I keep wanting to tell you what that word means to me, but the parents of Americans is what the president would like to call it. Deferred action for parents of Americans, DAPA. Well, I watched one of those parent now, come across the border in an inflatable raft with 2 coyotes. They got paid something to do that. I don't know how much. And now the